Hello and greetings. It's Mr. Fowler here for another session of Composition 2. I hope that you're doing well. Let's go ahead and start for today. I'm going to share some of the content with you. Okay. So for today, we have a shorter session, a little bit of a preview and review. It should only take about 10 minutes, just going back to cover the argumentative essay. And then I'm going to draft for a few minutes about how to begin the process of writing an argumentative paper, going back to some of the content from Chapter 7 of our alternate text, the practical argument. And then we'll move on to discuss the second revision paper. Oops. That we're going to approach before the semester ends. Okay, before we get into our preview and review, I wanted to address a couple of things that have come up in the class. Number one is an email that you all should have received regarding this course and its evaluation. It's very important that you take some time this week to respond to that email and take that quiz. We need that data as a school to make sure that instructors such as myself are doing an adequate job of teaching you. This is also a great opportunity for you to voice those aspects of the class that you enjoyed, as well as some that you think could be improved. So go ahead and take care of that. There should be a linkage, like I said, vis-a-vis your Kishwaukee College email. It is on a limited time frame. So if you don't have that link anymore, let me know. But otherwise, if you could take that assessment and report it, it would be very helpful for the college's metrics and data gathering needs. The second thing that the college wanted me to do was reach out to you today. And they are in the process right now of scheduling and sort of codifying and nailing down what the spring semester will look like. So if you have not yet discussed, with your family and friends what your spring semester is going to look like with your employer, so on and so forth, now might be a good time to start thinking about that process and hammering that down. One of the things that we've been encouraged to do, so let me back up for a second. Disclaimer, okay? If you've already heard the spiel from some of your other instructors, just bear with me, okay? But one of the things that the college has asked us to do is to reach out to you as our audience and as our students, and to suggest that we know that times might be difficult economically, emotionally, psychologically. COVID, and in terms of just physical health as well, COVID has really changed a lot of our lives. And we want to propose 3 different things to students. Number one, if you feel like you're in a sense of free fall because of all of this, one of the things that continuing your college education here at Kishwaukee can do for you is to help you reestablish a set of priorities in your life. A schedule of courses and learning is a way to help bring structure and keep a sort of regiment going in your life that may have been disturbed by all of the issues at play due to this virus. Number 2, this will eventually end, okay? We can project an end at some point to this idea of COVID. And when that happens, the economy is going to pick up and emerge stronger perhaps than even before. And it was a very strong economy prior to this issue. the sickness. So the person who has completed more of their education will be especially poised when things get back in order to step into some of those necessary and needed positions in our workforce. So keep that in the back of your mind as well, because that may be one of the benefits to continuing your education during the spring semester. Number three, there is a concern that we wanted to address as it relates to your financial health and concerns. And we know that students are, in many cases, forced to focus on either work or schooling. But the benefits of continuing to work as you learn is that you can also establish a cadence and rhythm for your life with all of the more flexible options like distance learning that we've all had a little bit of a forced taste of as the semester continues. So I really appreciate your time. I know that that's not what you're tuning in for, but the college asked me to reach out, like I said. And as a dutiful employee, I feel it's only my role to adhere to that. Okay, on to the matter at hand. Let's go ahead and use that share screen function. I'm going to dip out from the video feed for a bit, so you can probably still hear me. And we're going to start here. Oops. Let's try session 26. Mr. Fowler. All right. So again, today, I'm going to take about 10 minutes just to review The Princess Bride. And one last reminder, check in on that course survey as soon as you can. Then about 30 minutes of lecture, and we'll keep the remaining time focused on the argument writing lab. For next time, meaning Thursday, you'll have some more free time virtually the entire session to focus on your writing or planning for the argumentative essay. And I will be available vis-a-vis virtual conferences, starting at 9:30 a.m. and going to about 12:30 in the afternoon, and starting again around 1:30 in the afternoon and going to about 4:30 in that evening. So reach out to me with questions and concerns that you might have. Okay, let's wrap up and sort of complete this process of The Princess Bride. The final chapter is delivered to us in a 40-minute countdown. And why 40 minutes? Well, again, Wesley has been treated by Miracle Max with a phantasmagoria, a special pill that will help to revitalize him, but it's limited in its capabilities. It should give them, meaning the heroes, Wesley, along with Fezzik and Inigo Montoya, enough time to use their other assets to accomplish a myriad amount of things, including embarrassing Humperdinck by breaking up his wedding, reuniting Wesley and Buttercup so that they can live a life of their own, helping Inigo Montoya find Count Rugen and gain his revenge so that he can satisfy the memory of his father, and helping Fezzik reunite with his friends for a meaningful activity. As I said, the chapter plays out in a 40-minute countdown, and we realize that around 5:37 in that countdown, Inigo Montoya confronts Count Rugen and delivers his famous message. Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father, prepare to die. His father is avenged, and the fencer is free to live the life that he always should have been able to lead. To get to Count Rugen, though, Fezzik the giant must leave Wesley, who is so weak that he needed to be physically moved. So he goes and breaks down a door for Inigo Montoya so that he can continue his pursuit of the Count. But when Fezzik returns, Wesley's gone. Fezzik, dutiful to the end, tries to find Wesley and chooses one of the three doors that um, are at the end of the hall where he left him. Unfortunately, Fezzik's luck runs true to form, and he does not find Wesley. He makes his way downstairs and outside to the stables, where he finds four of Prince Humperdinck's white stallions. We catch up, though, with Wesley, and we find out that he has slipped into Buttercup's bedchamber and surprises her, and also saves her from committing suicide. So the two lovers are finally reunited. But they're interrupted by Prince Humperdinck, who challenges Wesley in a duel to the death, which is probably what he should have done in the first place. But Wesley counters his duel to the death with a charge to duel to the pain. Humperdinck confesses some confusion on the matter, and Wesley explains that to the pain means the two of them will duel until Humperdinck's eyes are gouged out, his four major limbs are severed, and his tongue is cut from his head. His perfect ears he keeps, of course, Wesley explains, so that he can hear every shrill scream or mocking child who encounters his discarded and disgraced form. Humperdinck realizes Wesley could be bluffing, but he was only going to kill Buttercup anyway. And he thinks to himself, should I risk all of my kingdom, all of my life of luxury for this one person I was going to murder anyway, when Wesley, if he's not bluffing, could be a very devastating opponent to confront. So he chooses the better path of valor here, which is to give in. Buttercup ties him to a chair, and he's left in the bedroom as Fezzik starts to throw little pebbles at the windowsill. As Buttercup goes to investigate, the three of them, Humperdinck, Wesley, and Buttercup, are joined by Inigo Montoya, who emerges bloody but sound for the most part. Of course, Buttercup opens the windows and encounters Fezzik, who's finally done something right in bringing the four stallions with him to facilitate their escape. They descend from the window, mount the horses, and Buttercup explains to the brutes guarding the gate that she is the queen and will have their lives if they don't make way for her. And then the four friends escape on horseback to live happily ever after. But we ask the question, does the ending satisfy? Certainly all of the heroes get what they want. Wesley and Buttercup are reunited. Fezzik does something right and can feel like a hero for the first time. And Inigo Montoya has satisfied his thirst for revenge. But as we noted last time, most adventure stories and fairy tales have two endings, or a double edge, if you want to get in on that action. They have the classic version, which we know and love, and the original. So here we have the same sort of thing. We have Goldman's victorious heroes, and we even get a suggestion that Inigo Montoya might take up his role as the Dread Pirate Roberts. But we also have the Morgenstern example. And in the Morgenstern example, the heroes do escape. However, we learn that because of the rough writing, Inigo's wound reopens. The pill that Wesley was taking begins to wear off, so he relapses. Buttercup's horse throws a shoe, and Fezzik takes a wrong turn, rather, in the escape process. So we're left with this question of concern. Do they really have a happy ending? Does anyone? And that goes back to that discussion that we had during week 8. Is the focus of the book that life is not fair, it's just simply better than the alternative? And many of you raised some very good questions. I even had one student who suggested that Goldman's version allows us to have it both ways. Obviously, when you're a child and you read the story as a child, you can sort of write off the fact that the heroes win and they're successful. And as an adult, you can take solace in the fact that even though the story draws to a conclusion, there's perhaps a little bit more to be said. Life is not perfect, but at this moment in time, when the story freezes as it concludes, it's relatively perfect, right? Or as perfect as it can get. Because after all, life is seldom fair, but it is fairer than the alternative, which is death. So now we have a question that we have to focus on. What should we write about? If you've gone ahead and completed the persuasive essay with the Princess Bride, then you can rewrite about just about anything or any topic that you wish. If you wanted to stick with the Princess Bride as a theme, though, because believe it or not, there are some students that just find the process of writing easier when they have a specific goal in mind, and they're driving toward a finite point. Here again are the options. Option 1, go back and revisit the ad analysis paper about the Princess Bride. Complete a simple search on Google Images or Pinterest, looking for the posters that came in the aftermath of the film's release as opposed to the initial poster, and maybe even some of the foreign movie poster releases. Then argue that these alternate additions to the poster were better, and in doing so, make sure that you address what was new or different, or how visual cues and images were added that make them superior versions of the poster. You could also take what I feel personally is the easiest option and write a comparison contrast essay that looks at the original novel that we've completed and its famous film adaptation. Goldman notably wrote the screenplay for the film adaptation in addition to writing the original book. But there are still many differences between them. So for this paper, you would identify as many of those differences as you can and respond by asking yourself, why do you feel Goldman made those changes? And with which of those changes do you agree and disagree? You could also compare some of the relationships in the novel. Relationships between men and women, like that of Wesley and Buttercup specifically, but you might also want to write about Miracle Max and Valerie, or Goldman and his wife Helen, or even Buttercup's parents. Maybe you want to write about Buttercup and Humperdinck. I don't know. But take those relationships on one hand and compare and balance them against the relationships between the men in the book. Goldman and his father, Inigo Montoya and Domingo, Inigo and Fezzik, and Goldman and his fictional son, Jason. What do those relationships show? Are one set relationships between men versus relationships between men and women, are they depicted more positively, one than the other? Why do you think that is? Argue your points for topic 3. And lastly, it's often said that those in the path of vengeance should dig 2 graves, one for their victims and another for themselves. Reflect on Inigo and his quest for vengeance specifically. Does this old adage apply to him? If so, what does Inigo potentially miss out on as he pursues his vengeance? Now, there's nothing to say that those are the only topics you can write about. Obviously, you have a whole host of potential topics to pursue. But if you are interested in the Princess Bride and creating a thematic arc for all 3 papers, those are the 3 options I was able to come up with. You may be interested in pursuing those to one degree or another, but like I said, your mileage might vary. Now, for those of you who are going to write both for the Princess Bride and maybe writing for a different or unique topic, let's spend a little bit of time refreshing ourselves on the ways that we design an argumentative paper. So I'm going to stop the video again and share this other PowerPoint with you. You can ignore this page here. Okay, ignore that page. Here we go. Writing an argumentative essay. Now, this probably isn't necessary, but why would I ignore this page? Because I used this for last class's session number 25. This is your session 26. That's why we're ignoring that page. So, writing an argumentative essay. This comes again from Practical Argument, chapter 6, or 7 rather. The writing process is necessary to think about every time you begin a new project, because before you can convincingly write an argumentative essay, you need to understand what is involved in that process. And each writing process is unique, although they may share versions or similar steps. So the first part, which you'll engage in today and Thursday, is the planning portion, which means you've got to choose a topic. And selecting a topic might seem really easy, but it might also be nebulous for a lot of you, meaning you're not quite sure where to start. So our authors, Kisner and what's the other author's name? Mandel. Kisner and Mandel suggest starting with a topic that you have some emotional stake in. In other words, think about a topic that you care about. Here's an example that you might begin with, and we'll walk through how this example could be tailored to an argumentative style of essay writing. Let's say you were handed this prompt: write a 5-page essay on a topic related to college services, facilities, or curricula. That doesn't even have the word argument in it or in its description. But the point is that this is a fairly typical kind of paper topic that might be handed out in a composition course. So the first thing you're going to need to do is narrow the topic, focusing on one particular service, program, facility, or curriculum to write your paper on. Now let's suppose further that you narrow it to the green movement on college campuses, which is an emphasis on energy conservation, recycling, in order to maximize the efforts spent by the college and by. Well, then you have to ask yourself, okay, I've got that idea, but is there anything I should avoid? Typically, there are some things you might want to avoid as potential paper topics. For example, if something is a very fact-based argument, let's stick with the green example for a second. Maybe you want to write a paper about arguing for reusing recycled paper products. Well, there's not a lot that can be said against that idea. It's just that in preparation for paper selection and presentation styles, whether or not the material was recycled is relatively secondary to the emotional choice associated with the aesthetics of the person who's using the paper. So that's not really something that's arguable. And then there's so much fact-based information about why it's available, that, or why it would be a good decision, in other words, that it makes for a boring paper. Not one that I would necessarily want to read that much. And I think for the purposes of a writer, maybe not that interesting of a writing task. It might become more drudgery at that point. Again, though, based on this particular topic, your individual mileage may vary. But along the same lines, you should also avoid topics that make it difficult to bring something new to the conversation. Okay, I'm often reminded of an example from my student teaching days where I advised a student to avoid writing about topics such as the death penalty. Why would I avoid that? Not because it's controversial or because I have one particular view on it, but because I knew from experience that most of the information about the death penalty that's available suggests that it's not a good deterrent to criminality or reducing criminal recidivism. In other words, most of the information suggests that despite the threat, we're speaking only of the threat now, of the death penalty, that it doesn't seem to curb the rise of crime or the percentages of how crime escalates or de-escalates. That's due to a number of factors, but it makes it difficult when all of the information suggests one thing to bring a new perspective. You can still argue for the death penalty in that context, but then it's based on more of an emotional belief or religious or ethical belief system. And those arguments, of course, quickly break down if someone doesn't share the same moral or ethical belief system. So you don't, you just rest in two intractable camps, and there's nothing more that can be said about that. So avoid topics like that. Also, try to make sure that the topic you select isn't so narrow that it makes it difficult for the reader to engage with. For example, if you're arguing that Call of Duty Cold War is a better video game experience than, say, Spider-Man Miles Morales, well, that might be fascinating to, the 10% of your audience that's really into gaming, but probably not very engaging for the majority of your readership. So that may be too narrow of a topic. Okay, so once you decide on what your topic is and you've narrowed it down, it's time to begin the drafting process, in which you can use all sorts of various invention strategies to help brainstorm some different ideas. Eventually, though, you want to arrive at your thesis. Remember, of course, that a thesis is the central element of any argumentative essay. Usually, this is where the reader goes to understand your position. And you may also want to include, as a backup sentence to your thesis, an explanation about how you're going to introduce your evidence and position yourself in relationship to the topic. Keep in mind that with a well-hewn thesis statement, you want to express the point in a specific way that's not overly wordy. And there are some good examples of your text practical argument that illustrate the differences between a wordy thesis statement and a more precise and poignant one. Another concern to keep in mind in the early stages of the drafting process, which we're focusing on today, is your audience and the purpose. Now, on one level, your audience is me, but we probably will have time for another student peer review process. So you may want to also think about how a student might respond to your particular claims or ideas. The key here is to know who your audience is and wager what their knowledge, beliefs, or values bring to the entire writing process. Assume that they are receptive to your ideas, but that they still need to be convinced. Try to aim for the neutral. There are always going to be people in your audience who are more or less receptive. For those who are simply intractable and have a predetermined notion about your topic, at least get them to agree that you've made a good case. But like I said earlier, aim for the neutral, because most topics you will find people are neutral on. Now, once you understand what you're supposed to do to convince them or bring that neutral portion of your audience into your way of thinking, you need to gather the proper evidence. And I have an image over here of the fellas from BuzzFeed, True Crime and Supernatural. I love that series. And the taller guy in the back here is a total non-believer, whereas the gentleman in the front is he's interested in ideas like the paranormal and extraterrestrial life and so on and so forth, versus the skeptical colleague. And their dynamic is a lot of fun to watch in those BuzzFeed YouTube channel posts. But they do the same thing that I'm asking you to do. They gather evidence and evaluate it for how relevant and useful it is. Remember that the most convincing argument tends to meet a certain list of criteria. That is, it tends to be accurate, meaning it can be fact-checked by other sources. It seems to often be relevant to the issue at hand. It seems to be representative of a large group of information, not just a select portion of an audience or a portion of research. And it, in that same vein of thought, seems to be sufficient to the task. One of the things that you also need to do is to be on the lookout for bias. So from this point of the presentation on, we're just going to talk about some of the things that your text warns you to be conscientious of. Now, I think we're already aware of what it means to be biased, but the book's definition is that it should refer to a writer's use of preconceived ideas as opposed to factual evidence, which are used as support. Avoid that trap if you can. In order to detect that bias, they have some examples which I think are good. Does the source use slanted language? Okay. If it's using a lot of wiggle words or driving you toward one specific conclusion or another, it's probably biased. Does the supporting evidence seem to hold up under scrutiny? What's the tone like? Are the writers snarky, or are they acting facetiously? Are they being satirical with their response? If so, there's a good chance you're reading a source that might be slightly biased. Are there overtly offensive statements or characterizations? If you find this in your source material, you know you're dealing with a biased source. So those sources are easily discredited and aren't worthy of your time or attention. The other concern about drafting a paper is saving enough space within the structure of the argument to refute opposing opinions. You should identify the most convincing arguments against your position and then prepare to refute them. Good refutations are a valuable insight into writing because, number one, they help you fill the space of a particular paper that someone like Mr. Fowler might assign. But it goes beyond that. You create a sort of empathy in your reader because you're willing to address faults in your own perspective that they might detect. You also put another feather in your cap by creating an effective response to those counter arguments. And you present yourself as someone who hasn't just researched the topic from their perspective, but who has taken a more well-rounded approach to the entire process. You're a more informed party, as it says here. So let's suggest that for a moment you might have a factual error you encounter in your research. Well, identify and correct that issue with an explanation as to why the faulty or factual error is present in the research that you've done. If you're facing an issue like insufficient support, then just find more information to shore up your argument. If there's a weakness in the logic behind the reasoning that you've used, or behind the reasoning of a specific source you want to bring to bear on a topic. Identify what fallacy is at play and explain why the logic is flawed. That can be an example of how you can still turn a missed opportunity into a positive. Because if you spent some time and you found a source that's biased or that's out of sync or illogical, that doesn't mean you've wasted that time in researching. You can use that example and set it up as a counter to why your perspective is more correct. The same thing goes with an example that exaggerates something. Identify the exaggeration and explain why the author overstates his or her case. Finally, with biased statements, you can again identify the bias, showing how they exhibit the writer's perspective. This is a way for you to turn a weakness into a positive attribute for your argument. Lastly, irrelevant arguments should be identified and explained as not pertinent to the overall conversation. Okay, we're ready for part 3. Once you've written a version of your paper, and even before it reaches me in the Dropbox, you should do a little bit of preventative revising. Specifically, you might find that in the course of your research, your perspective has changed. So go back to your thesis and, if necessary, modify it to adopt the way that you now feel. You may also want to pause near the beginning of your essay and supply enough background information to your reader in case they're unfamiliar with your topic or the various viewpoints that are available for said argument. And then be sure to select your preferred argument type, meaning, are you arguing for a specific definition of an idea or object over another? Are you trying to establish a cause and effect relationship, like with the comparison contrast paper? Are you evaluating something, as in the visual design paper? Are you proposing a type of action or a form of adoption for a idea, principle, or plan? Or are you making an ethical argument? I don't know what the answer is for you specifically, but being aware of your preferred type of argument can help you to establish the best way to present it to your reader. Okay. Now you're at the stage of drafting where you have to ask yourself, do I want an outline? Is that worthy of time? I used to assign outlines as assignments, but now that you're this far into the writing process, I don't feel they're very valuable because a lot of students get frustrated by the outlining process and they just don't like it. So I have often argued that if an outline works for you, use it. It's available and running on Desire to Learn, so you can take a look at a prepared outline and use that if you wish to use it. If you don't like outlines and you prefer some other method of structuring your paper, go for it. Along the way, don't neglect logos, ethos, and pathos, sort of the foundational ways to establish credibility for your audience. Use of logic, use of emotional appeal, use of a theory of structure that you can use to bring your audience into your realm of influence. Make sure you've been well informed about the process that you're arguing for and your perspective as well. And be reasonable. Try to establish common ground with your reader and win some points early on by maintaining a reasonable tone in your writing. Also, be fair. When you introduce evidence for your argument to shore up your perspective, make sure that it's presented in a way that is clear, that is logical, that is honest, and that's unbiased. When it comes to the overall structure, just as a reminder, following a general structure for argument with a funnel opening where you move from very general information to a more specific thesis, and then you follow with body paragraphs that introduce topic sentence relating back to your evidence, is all a really good idea. I might also suggest that you develop opposing arguments in separate body paragraphs from your topic sentences that, sorry, not from your topic sentences, but from your body paragraphs that introduce the evidence from your introduction and more developed paragraphs. And of course, you flip the process on its head, starting with a specific restatement of your thesis and expanding to a strong conclusion in a pyramid type of outline or look. The best arrangement of material is not necessarily going to be that strict, though. You might find that the best arrangement is not dependent upon a rigid structure. So feel free to find the best kind of material to serve the purposes of your individual arguments. Just make sure that as you do so, it's representative of the research that you've done. When it comes to research in particular, or specifically, select that research which is the most convincing and try to summarize or paraphrase the most relevant information from the sources that you've looked at. Save those moments where you drop a quotation or a truth bomb, if you will, from another source or author for those moments where you need evidence to shore up your ideas or support your opinions. And lastly, with grammar, there are a couple of specific tips that the authors bring up, and we haven't paid a whole lot of attention to grammar this semester because I haven't really seen it as an issue that's impacting anyone's writing in this class. There are a few things that you should always adhere to. For example, it's always good to try to make sure you're avoiding things like fragments, comma splices, run-on sentences, so on and so forth. But generally, take time to use subordination and coordination accurately, because they can help make the meaning of what it is you're trying to say more precise and more clear. Coordination refers to those ideas, those conjunctions like for, and, but, nor, yet, and so, the fanboys. And subordination includes those subordinating conjunctions like although or because, which draw a contrast between ideas. So when you're bringing ideas together, coordinate. When you're comparing or contrasting ideas, use subordination. Of course, you should always use clear transitional words and phrases to make sure that you're clarifying or cueing your reader to these changes and to apprise them of where they're at in the argument. There's a great chart on page 271 of your text that covers suggested transitions to be used in an argumentative paper. Lastly, parallelism is something that we haven't talked a lot about, but I think makes a certain amount of sense for argumentation. So when you're drafting your essay, make sure that you're using any corresponding words, phrases, or clauses in parallel terms, which means you match the parts of speech to express corresponding ideas together. For example, if you've got a couple of paired items, rather than writing an unclear sentence like this one, creating a green campus is important because it sets an example for students and the environment will be protected. Not a bad sentence, it's serviceable enough, but compare that to this version. Creating a green campus is important because it sets an example for students and protects the environment. You establish a verb tense with sets that's complemented by protects in the second half. So that's a lot more parallel in terms of the sentence structure. If you've got, again, items in a series, such as this example, students can do their part by supporting a green campus in 4 ways. By avoiding bottled water, use of electricity should be limited, and they can recycle packaging, and educating themselves about environmental issues is a good strategy. That's both wordy and cloudy or confusing. Just modify that sentence for more parallel and coherent structure, like this. Students can do their part to support a green campus in 4 ways: by avoiding bottled water, limiting the use of electricity, by recycling packaging, and by educating themselves about environmental issues. There, you're employing the use of multiple gerunds or ing words that help to round out the overall structure of that sentence and bring it a level of coherence and clarity that the other version simply lacked. Okay, that's it for today. Go and be productive. If you should have some questions or concerns, as always, don't hesitate to contact me. I am available for one-to-one conferences, both later today and on Thursday. The first group of time available will be from 9:30 to 12:30 in the afternoon, and then later this afternoon until about 4:30. The argument essay is due on the 5th by midnight. Okay. All right. That's about it for Mr. Fowler. I want to thank you again for your time. Let me take care of this. Hold on. I want to thank you again for your time and your attention, and I bid you the best as you begin work on your final project for the semester. Until next time, this is Mr. Fowler saying stay healthy, stay smart, and take care of yourselves. Bye-bye now.